So one of the arguments I hear against educational reform is that you can't teach critical thinking, not in the context of a child being genetically predisposed against it, but on the basis that a curriculum about it is nigh impossible to build. Really, is that so? Well, let's think about it for a moment and actually try to come up with an idea rather than idly speculating over it. So let's start with what we're defining it as. I find it's very helpful to clearly establish definitions and goals if we're planning to construct a means of reaching those goals. Now, if I Google critical thinking definition, I get the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. If we go to the wiki page's procedure summary, it reads as follows: a persistent effort to examine any belief or supposed form of knowledge in the light of the evidence that supports or refutes it and the further conclusions to which it tends. There's more on the page, but it tends to revolve around the ability to examine things with evidence, search for outside information, and check multiple perspectives so as to not be locked into tunnel vision on a topic. So we're looking for the development and application of a set of reasoning skills that allow someone to perform these functions. So let's come up with an example of where some of these skills would be needed and how those skills could be learned. Now, during the events of the Snowden leak, there was a point where several countries offered Snowden asylum, and these nations were subsequently praised as champions of human rights. In fact, I filmed several top-voted comments on YouTube videos talking about how amazing all these countries were for supporting Snowden. Since this conclusion of how great a nation is at human rights was, in every case I encountered, based entirely on the offer of asylum to Edward Snowden, I promptly criticized the people making the claim that these nations were paragons of human rights, because they had done nothing to research whether or not that was actually true. Furthermore, they couldn't understand the concept of an ulterior motive. The idea that perhaps there was something to gain by offering asylum to Snowden was completely foreign to them. Similar gigantic mistakes were, and continue, to be consistently made by both sides of the debate, and I've addressed this on numerous occasions. That is a level of ignorance that is too high. Such a large amount of ignorance displayed by such a large number of people warrants correction, especially if these people vote on subjects they are ignorant of. So for the purpose of example, let's look at ulterior motives. Perhaps we could introduce people to the idea that ulterior motives A, exist, and B, are something to watch out for. How do we do that? Well, there are many options and different things we could do. We could include information on political backstabbing in civics classes and discuss it and engage the students, but for the purpose of this video, let's use the example of a simple game. A game called Diplomacy, which is basically all about deception, strategy, and ulterior motives. It's a simple board game, but you often have to deceive people to win. A major mechanic of the game is that you make alliances with other players and don't necessarily have to keep your word, and indeed keeping your word consistently will likely result in losses. Perhaps, if a student was playing this game once in a while, it would help him learn that maybe there are people out there that will lie to you. Maybe not everything you're told is true. Maybe there's an ulterior motive. Maybe someone has something to gain. Maybe not everything a politician says is the truth. Now, of course, I'm not holding up the game Diplomacy as if it were a singular paragon of critical thought. I'm simply using it as an example of an activity that exercises certain actions and skills. Skills that perhaps would be very beneficial to a voting citizenry. The ability to identify potential deceit, for example. Now, someone might argue, well, I don't want them finding out that there are bad people out there, but I ask you, what's the greater evil? Do you remember the economic problems we suffered as a result of so many people being duped into bad housing loans? Do you think it's really in the best interest of a child to withhold information all the way until adulthood, and when they get thrown into the shark tank with predatory housing loans, predatory contracts, and predatory lawsuits, they have no idea what's going on? This has already been demonstrated to have disastrous consequences, both for the individual and the economy as a whole. Renaming a shark to Cuddly McSnugglebunny may make it slightly more kawaii, but does nothing to alter its dietary preferences. As such, I feel it's much better to teach someone how to swim before we throw them into the water. And understanding that ulterior motives exist, and people may try to trick and mislead you, is a big step in the direction of finding the truth. Perhaps many past issues would not have been so bad had people been less easily swindled. And giving people the skills to be swindled less is not an insurmountable task, it just requires a little education and involvement. People need to be involved and do an activity to better retain the information. But that's a subject for a future video. I'll see you next time. Later, YouTube.